Hi, I'm Tony, and in this video I'll show you a trick that will improve your drawings, and the best part is that all you have to do is look at your reference in a different light.
So what do I mean by that?
Well, a reference is an assortment of information. The problem with this is that most people can't accurately separate good information from bad information. For example, most people would look at a face and see a pair of eyes instead of the lines and angles that give them form. Knowing this, let's look at what are the types of good information you should focus on. But first, for more clarity, let's divide them into two categories. We have 2D and 3D information. 2D information refers to how we see subjects on paper. You can think of a TV screen as opposed to the movie set it depicts. Everything you see is technically a 2D image of values that are in your field of vision at any point in time. Your brain then applies the illusion of three-dimensionality to it, which is also how a bunch of paint on a flat canvas can appear 3D. Being able to switch between these two ways of seeing things is probably the most important skill you could ever master when it comes to art. So what are the 2D elements in your reference that you should pay especially close attention to? Well, the top 5 that come to mind are as follows: distances, lines, angles, curves, and shapes. Let's start with distances. Distances aren't actually important on their own, but rather in relation to one another. Measuring these is one of the only ways you can ensure that elements aren't too big or too small in relation to the rest of your drawing. Lines are pretty straightforward. Essentially, you can use imaginary vertical, horizontal, and diagonal lines to either draw parts of your drawing or check which parts of the reference may be aligned with one another. Angles refer to both the angle of a line on paper as well as the angles between lines. Angles dictate the difference between how certain facial features may look from one person to another. So by drawing them randomly, you will get random results that are most likely different from the reference. Now, when it comes to curved lines, there aren't many tricks you can use to make drawing them easier. I suggest simply focusing on how the curve looks, how far down the line it is found, and maybe its alignment with other parts of the reference. The word shapes can refer to a bunch of different things in this context. First, we have something like patches of value, but on a color reference, this can refer to different colors. Make sure that the 2D shapes in your drawing are the same as those on the reference. You should also pay attention to the shape of negative spaces in your drawing, as it is often easier to draw than the things surrounding it. Now let's talk about 3D information. 3D information refers to the 3D aspects of an object, such as how light interacts with its surface. This way of looking at an artwork no longer requires you to focus on each part of it as a separate piece, but rather at how all of them come together. So what does this mean? Well, essentially, does your drawing look three-dimensional or does it look flat? While you focus on the 2D aspects, you will inevitably end up making mistakes, and these mistakes can add up to where your drawing no longer looks 3D. To fix these mistakes, you should change the way you look at your drawing from 2D to 3D at different points throughout the drawing process. This way you can make sure that no meaningful mistakes went unnoticed. For this, you will have to have at least a basic understanding of constructive drawing, which refers to drawing subjects from basic 3D shapes. Now let's address some common questions regarding this subject. How many measurements should you take? Well, the way I see it, there's no point in creating a one-to-one replica of the reference. Cameras can already do that both faster and more accurately. A reference can be divided into primary shapes, which are the bigger shapes present in the reference, secondary shapes, which are medium-sized, and tertiary shapes, which are the small details in your reference. Based on your goals and art style, you should pick a point on the scale between primary and tertiary shapes that allows you to depict all the parts of the reference that you find important to some extent. If you're drawing a gesture drawing, for example, primary and maybe some secondary shapes are enough. On the other hand, if you're doing a detailed portrait, you will inevitably have to include a bunch of tertiary ones. As for the second question, how accurate should you be? It's okay if your measurements are off because you try to go with a more stylized approach. Of course, if they're off despite you trying your best to follow the reference, then you should take a 5-minute break away from your drawing to reset your eyes. Once your eyes have readjusted, look at your drawing next to the reference and try to find out what went wrong based on what you learned today. At this point, you shouldn't try to fix it. Just look for mistakes, take notes, and use it as a learning experience. Remember, you don't have to finish all your pieces. As a matter of fact, you should approach most of them with the goal of improving a certain skill. So, to recap, make sure you pay attention to both the 2D and 3D information provided by the reference. This includes measuring distances, lines, angles, curves, and shapes, as well as making sure that they come together nicely to create the illusion of three-dimensionality. And your drawing doesn't have to be a one-to-one copy of the reference. You can choose to ignore or alter certain details to match the style you are going for or the overall goal of your drawing session. Anyway, that's all I have for you today. If you enjoyed this video or learned something new, make sure to give it a like and subscribe, and leave any questions you have in the comment section down below. Bye!